Okay. Hey, all right, you guys. Today, I'm excited about today's topic because I'm curious. And this is some stuff that I've wanted to know about. And so I thought through all of my friends, and there's probably nobody who knows more about this subject than our guest today. So today we have my buddy Andrew Blackwell. He has a degree in history with an emphasis in Middle Eastern and medieval studies. He has a degree in philosophy with an emphasis in ethics and classical Arabic writing. And you've almost finished your degree in theology. And you've also had a bunch of articles published on numerous topics that discuss things that have to do with Muslims and the Islamic religion. So,
first of all, how did you get through, and how do you keep getting through that much schooling? I mean...
Oh, yeah. Well, I started out and I was a history major, and I loved it, and then I got into philosophy, and I was like, this is what I really love, and then I got into theology, and I was like, I actually like this more than all of them. And after 5 years of undergrad, I was 6 credits away from getting a theology degree, and I said, I'm just going to go with...
So you have how many degrees?
3. I got a law degree after all that, so...
Really?
Yeah.
So 4 degrees?
And so then
I got the 2 bachelors in the law, and then I was going to go to divinity school, which is theology, but decided on law, and that was a
wow.
choice.
So then
That's
he got his law degree. He's read more books probably today than I've read in the last 20 years.
It's pretty poor.
Yeah.
I just read The Alchemist.
Oh, yeah.
So, really?
Yeah, huge fan of it. I mean, it was really good.
My education was I went into the academic advisor on the football team and I said, what's the easiest way to graduate from BYU? Because
communications or
I'm only
sociology.
doing this for my mom.
You already told the story on the podcast.
Oh, frick.
Uncle Tom.
Dang it. I'm turning more into my dad. Because
My wife
I like
tells
your
me
dad.
when I tell
That's
the
okay.
same story. She's like, my Uncle Tom used to tell us the same thing every time.
And I hate when I do that. Like, I hate when I tell the same story to people.
I got you.
So anyway, obviously, everybody knows that there's so many current events that have to do with the Muslim religion, and have to do with Muslims, and with Donald Trump saying things like, "We don't want any more Muslims coming in until we figure out what's going on," I think was the way he said it. And so I guess the first question I'd like to ask is, why do you even care so much about a religion that has nothing to do with you and, people that are so far away from you? Why have you studied for the last 13 years the Quran and the Islamic faith?
Yeah, I honestly, I had an experience when I was in France, and I saw a man hitting a woman in public in the streets. And now this was in an Arab quarter of town, and me and my buddy stepped in and said, no, this isn't okay. And we went to call the cops, and he kept yelling, it's my right, it's my right. And the cops showed up and basically said, they do what they do here, we do what we do out here, and we don't, as long as it's not a murder or something, we need to step in.
So you're talking about Sharia law?
A form of it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and France actually doesn't recognize Sharia law. Other countries do. England does. England has Sharia courts, which is insane.
So in England, they actually have a different judicial system for Muslims?
They can opt into a Sharia court, and there's 2 different courts over there that they can use. One's more prominent. The other one's kind of a for-profit court that some of the more...
Whoops, that's not good.
that some of the more... wealthy Muslims are starting to use over there in order to avoid the actual imams who will really lay the hammer down on them.
Okay. I don't want to come across totally racist, but...
Well, let's stop there, because Islam isn't a race. Mm-hmm. It's a religion.
All
so that's like me saying I'm racist against Mormons. No, but they're Mormons of every color, every creed, whatever. Mm-hmm. So Muslims... it's not a race. This is a religion. It's a set of beliefs. So that's whatever you say, you can't really come off as racist. They can call you an Islamophobe, but that's just whatever. Okay,
but typically, what percentage of Muslims do you think are Arabs?
Oh, vast. Well, geez, it's spreading. It's spreading.
Yeah.
At the beginning, 100, and then Now they're into Asian countries. A lot of the Asian countries are starting to pick them up. But I would still say vast majority, probably 80, 90%, maybe more.
Well, so in your opinion, what's the difference between a traditional American Muslim and a traditional American Christian?
The difference, now that's a big one. So there's a concept within the Islamic world called the Ummah. It's what Uma Thurman's named after, by the way.
Is it really?
Yeah. And Ummah basically means the body of believers. Now, when it started in Muhammad's time, Ummah meant all of the people, all of the community, even the Jews, even the pagans who worshipped idols, they were all part of the Ummah. But that changed over time. And it's been whittled down to just the body of believers. So in Islam...
And those who don't believe are the infidels?
Well, they're not a member of the Ummah.
Mm-hmm.
So infidel, that's a word that's been tossed around quite a bit, and it's difficult to really peg everyone else as an infidel because they're prospective Muslims. Are they an infidel? Well, I don't know. Are they your enemy? Not really. They might become a Muslim. Why would you call them your enemy? But it's those who actively and willingly say, no, I'm not Muslim. I won't be Muslim. That's an infidel. So the difference is the Ummah comes before everything else. So the Ummah comes before family. It comes before state.
You mean genetic family?
Yes.
Biological family?
Yes.
Huh.
So the difference between Islamic American and Christian American is that they're taught that their Ummah comes before all else. So yes, there are Muslims who serve in the military. Of course there is. But there's still that underlying teaching that their Ummah will come before their country, their Ummah will come before their family.
Well, so when would that, I mean, how would that actually manifest itself in an American Muslim? Like, when would he ever be, taught to put his Ummah over his biological family?
And an American Muslim, not very often. They're not executing people. There have been 2 cases in the last 72 hours where ISIS members have murdered their own family members. One was a mother, and the other one was a sister.
They were murdered?
Their brother or their son killed them in public. I call it murder. They call it a killing, but
An honor killing?
yeah.
What was the reason?
Both apostate.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
What countries are those in?
One was Iraq, and the other one was Afghanistan.
So what percentage of America's population right now identifies as Muslim?
Oh, it's a small percentage. It depends. The problem is with census. Can you honestly get a census of it? Can you honestly get a true number? It's not that large.
Like 3%?
Yeah, small.
yeah, but worldwide, how many Muslims are there?
1.2 billion,
1.2 billion. So
and they're growing.
so
much
4
faster.
times as many people as exist in the United States.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Now, this is the thing. I've read this, and you might be able to back this up with some of your studies or some of the things that you've heard. But what percentage of self-identified Muslims sympathize with Sharia law or agree?
Radical Islam.
Radical Islam.
Okay, Sharia law, it'd be 100% of Muslims agree with Sharia law.
And what is Sharia law specifically?
So Sharia law is the pure law given from Allah. So it's Allah's pure law. It supersedes
So what would be
all
the
other
things?
laws.
What would be the things that us as Westerners
It'd
would
be
be
like
like,
the law
what
of
the
Moses.
heck? What are the things that would be shocking to a traditional Westerner about Sharia law?
The women staying covered at all times, not speaking out in public. What would shock us the most is the punishment. If you commit adultery as a woman, you are killed, stoned, not killed, stoned to death. And there have been 6 instances in the last year of a woman being taken out. They dig a pit, they put her in it, sit her in it, and then the men in the community grab stones and stone her to death. And there's videos, and I don't recommend you watch them, but I've seen them all, and they're horrifying.
Wow.
And that is, and another aspect of it is her word is basically not worth anything in a Sharia court. So if her husband comes forth and says, this is what she did, she can stand up and say, no, I didn't. She'd have to have 2 witnesses to support her in order to negate just his word.
Okay, this is going to sound way flippant and whatever, but if all the girls are walking around looking like walking sheets with eyeballs, I mean, how are these women committing adultery, and how are people accusing them of it? I mean, is there anything? I mean, it just seems so arbitrary. Like, why would, I mean, how are these relationships even happening when they're not even allowed to communicate with anyone other than their husband, right?
And that's the issue, is a burden of proof. Here in the United States, we have the benefit of a burden of proof. And you have to prove with a preponderance of evidence, which means over 50%, or in criminal cases, beyond a reasonable doubt. With this, that doesn't exist. Once the husband speaks, she then gets to disprove whatever he has spoken. And there have been many cases of men not wanting to be married to her anymore and saying, I'm sick of her, or they get in a fight. And one of the most interesting things I think we should talk about is that it's an idea called taqiyya, which is deception. And this is taught in Islam, it's taught in the Quran, and it's taught, in their sittings, in their formal church settings. This is something that is taught. And basically, Muhammad taught that you can lie in three instances. The first instance is war. The second instance is to your wife, to basically calm things down or smooth things over. And the third instance is to deceive somebody who has power over you, who is not Islam, who is not Muslim.
Wow.
That's a concept most people don't understand. That's my biggest qualm with Islam, is the concept that they are actually encouraged to lie. It is seen as a good thing to be deceptive to somebody who does not believe what they believe.
Wow. I mean, I have some questions. Like, one of the things is people talk about these passages in the Quran, and they're like, oh, it says it right in the Quran, this and this and this. But, I've read the Old Testament, and there's some really jacked up passages in the Old Testament where, some of the prophets of the Old Testament did some really messed up things, incest and things like that. So why, what's the difference between the crazy passages in the Old Testament to Christians and the crazy passages in the Quran? I mean, why do we as Americans or as Westerners like to point to these, it says it right in the Quran, when people don't say, it says it right in the Bible, other than maybe the gay thing? But what do you think that's something that we tend to point to, it saying it directly in the Quran, more than people tend to say, well, Noah or whoever had sex with his daughter?
And people do say that. People do bring that up. The difference is, the main difference is the fact that the Old Testament took place 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. The Quran took place 1,400 years ago. So we had the New Testament. The New Testament basically wiped away the Old Testament. It took all of that stuff that we've read, and it said, no, you don't stone, no eye for an eye, no tooth for a tooth. Jesus said, turn the other cheek, love your enemies. He basically wiped out that Old Testament archaic, death and gloom sort of thing. And the other thing is it's so old and it's been translated so many times. Did that actually happen? Mm-hmm. Did the walls of Jericho really come down? Mm-hmm. Was Job a real person? We could talk about this for 3 hours, and I'd probably say no in most cases.
Yeah.
With the Quran, it's substantiated. Yeah. This was spoken by Muhammad. Muhammad never wrote, ever. He claims he couldn't read and write. I don't believe that. But he says he couldn't read and write. He would recite what he said. People write on whatever they have. They have camel bones with Quranic writings on it.
Well, so how was the Quran assembled? I mean, how did it come to one organized book?
Yeah, so they took all of these sayings and all these things, palm leaves, camel bones, all this other stuff, and they compiled it about, it's 40 to 60 years after Muhammad died. And one man did it, which, again, leads you to suspect of what did that man put in there, what did he take out, what did he leave in, what did he add? You know what I mean?
I mean, do we know who that guy is? Or?
Yeah, it's a weird Arabic name.
Oh, okay.
It's
but is he like highly respected?
Oh yeah, and they all agree. They all agree that and that's one of the arguing points for Islam is that the Quran, because of all these different sources, and they all seem to match up, that it had to have come from Allah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So back to, I don't want this podcast to get portrayed as, necessarily anti-Muslim. What are we talking about? More radical Islam type stuff? Like, what percentage of people are identifying, or I've heard statistics anywhere between 5 and 15% are radicalized. What?
Yeah, 15 to 30 is probably the best guesstimate. CIA puts it at 30, so that's more than the population of the United States.
So, and obviously there's varying degrees. I mean, I feel like the biggest issue that myself and fellow Americans, not being anti-Muslim, but the problem is when you have that many percentage of people, even if they're just sympathizers, you're talking tens, if not hundreds of millions.
You're talking over 300 million people.
Which leads us to the position of where those who are scared about it are fearful right now. I mean, is that kind of...
Yeah, and the other issue is I've spoken with a lot of Muslim people. I have friends who are Muslim, and we don't argue. I never try to go out and go after somebody, but I do try to get them to outright denounce those people. The people who are murdering, the people who are blowing up ISIS, ISIL, all that stuff.
Yeah, there's videos going around right now of Jewish professors. That one of the Jewish professor where he's trying to get that lady at the
to denounce Hamas.
Yeah, just that's an obvious terrorist network, and she won't do it. I think that's
and there's a reason.
Do they do that out of fear or because they genuinely
because they
sympathize?
agree?
Well, now okay, so let me lay a groundwork for you, and this will help understand. Muhammad started when he was 40. And he lived in Mecca. And he started with his teachings. He started, telling everybody these things. He started getting a gathering. Well, the rulers there, the tribe there, didn't like it. They believed they were paganists. They believed in a multitude of gods, and there was big trade. That was the main thing, was the trade there. They believed that their gods protected the trade, which was what kept them going. So they threw Muhammad out. He left. He went to Medina. So he kept prophesying, preaching down there. Well, after he got a very big gathering, he went back to Mecca. And he went up to the walls and they said, leave or we're going to fight you. He said, we've come to fight, whatever. They came out their armies, they ran into the mountains and they hid. They sent these delegations down. It took about 10, 14 days. They finally signed a 10-year treaty, which was, you can come here for Mecca. So they needed to go to Mecca to perform their pilgrimage, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. You can come here every year and we'll have a truce. 2 years later, Muhammad broke the truce. They stormed into Mecca. They took over Mecca. Now, the Islamic version of this is he went in peacefully and the people joined. He destroyed all the idols and everybody saw that Allah was great and Allah was good and this is what they needed to do, and they joined. Other versions are he went in and said, you will join or else you will die. If they did join, great. If they didn't,
well, how did they have all this power? I mean, how are they? I mean, because
Swords.
when you look at, the Islamic growth over the 100 or over 1,000 years, it's most of it's been through conquering,
conquest, right? Exactly.
And how do they? I mean, how are they so good at conquering why don't the other cities, why don't these other people have swords?
They did, but they were tribes. So back there they were tribal, so it was just a family. So you might have a tribe of 300 people, he's got 10,000 guys with swords. What are you going to do? You're going to get slaughtered or you're going to join. And so that's how, and his conquests after Muhammad were legendary. Like Genghis Khan would have been impressed with the way that he did it. Because not only did he go, unlike any other conquerors, he went in and he forced them to follow his religion. And because Islam is set up in such a way that you have to obey or else.
Is that the roots of jihad? Is that what jihad?
Jihad is a holy. So there's 2 types of jihad. There's they claim there's 2 types, and that one overrules the other. The first one's spiritual. That's the jihad within yourself to obey and to become a better person. The second one's jihad over those who won't follow or who are enemies. So let me just get
back to your ground.
Yeah. So Muhammad's entire life, in my opinion, was based on getting retribution for being wronged by the people of Mecca. That was his tribe. That was his clan. They threw him out. And now he came back and took over. And he was the ruler. And I mean, he ruled. And there's two types of sources. There are many types of sources. You have the Quran, you have Hadith. Now, Hadith is the words spoken by Muhammad that other people heard that didn't make it in the Quran, but they passed it down. And one Hadith, it's spoken that he basically, after he would conquer a place or, get more power, he'd take the women, he'd take the most beautiful ones for himself, and then he'd divvy out the other ones to his commanders.
Is the Hadith recognized by Islam?
Oh, yeah, they regularly speak it, read it, recite it. Some Hadiths are not written, and those are the ones I've done my absolute best to try to get somebody to tell me, but a lot of times they'll tell me, well, you need to know Arabic, I won't recite it in English, or you need to, So basically Muhammad's groundwork was divide and conquer, go forward and spread the word and the sword, through the sword. And they did so very successfully.
Okay, well, a lot of people know about the Crusades, and they say, well, Muslims are no different than Christians because, during the Middle Ages or medieval times or whenever it was that, whatever we call the period of the Crusades, that Christians were doing the same thing. So what's the difference between the Crusades and the spread of Islam?
Yeah, so now the Crusades are not... You can't really defend the Crusades and say, well, what a great thing the Christians did. It wasn't. And there's nothing in the Bible that would support them going out and doing what they did. It's inexcusable. However, politically speaking, there was a reason. They had come through, they had conquered Spain. They'd taken Portugal.
Who had?
The Muslims.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Two of the major trading hubs, the Moors, who were converted to Islam under the sword and then went and took over. That's one of your major trading hubs, and now Western Europe is having to deal with them. They raise higher taxes. There are different tax brackets for Muslims. If you're not a Muslim, you pay a much higher tax bracket. And they finally just said, you know what? No, we're taking our land back. They go storming into Spain. They kick them all out. They got their land back, and then they start chasing them back. They're like, we're going to run them all the way into the sea. And they keep chasing them, taking them back. Well, then they find out, they go back to Jerusalem, they start massacring the Christians there and the Jews, anybody who wasn't Muslim. And so what do? They send for help. Here comes the Crusades.
So so basically, just so I get this clear for anybody that doesn't understand the history of it, you're saying that the Crusades were basically just Catholics trying to take back what was once theirs, and that the Muslims had conquered and taken over those things.
And I would say it wasn't based on religion. I'd say it was based on politics and economics. Because people don't care about which God you pray to. They care about what's in their pocketbook. And if this guy shows up and he's taking out my pocketbook, especially back then, you're going to be fighting. So.
Okay, well then let's get to, what's really important. I mean, right now we have these really powerful, really successful groups like ISIS, and and that's what the Western world, like the people in Paris, the people in San Bernardino, that's the kind of thing that people are scared about. Are people that sympathize with ISIS, and that people that want to go around and kill innocent people. So what, in your opinion, what do you think needs to happen and in order to make this go away, or to minimize it, make it less of a risk? I mean, what would you recommend that our government did to, minimize the risk to Westerners?
We have to recognize what Islam is, and that is a religion that is based on spreading through force of will. It is not a religion of proselytizing. They don't go door to door. You've never had a Muslim knock on your door and say, hey, let's read the Quran. That's not the way it was set up. That's not the way Muhammad did it. They're not going to change path from what Muhammad did. And they have very successful Muslim nations now that are run based upon that. It's a very good way of keeping people under thumb.
Yeah, but so how do we have, 1.5 or 1.3 billion Muslims? I mean, they were all converted through force?
Well, not all of them. A lot of them were born into it. A lot of them are raised that way. Yeah. And nowadays, it's not even like, it's not really force. It's more of a...
They grow and they immigrate, and then
that's right.
They populate.
Exactly.
And they take over, these areas, and people have been saying it for years, but that's what happened in France. They migrate there, they build these communities, and then they spread out, and now their growth is by immigration and the population growth.
Yeah,
but isn't that? But the thing is though is France wanted them there because Europe. The average European, they don't have that many kids. They're actually if it was just the white people, those countries would die out.
They're depopulating.
They're depopulating, and so they actually wanted as much immigration as possible, and so they invited, whoever wanted to come so that they could actually have population growth, to pay the taxes, to do the work. And
they had to allow them in because of imperialism. French imperialism, they'd gone and conquered these Arabic nations, and they give them basically a second-class citizenship. So if you were from, Senegal, any of these French-speaking Arab countries, you could go to France. You basically had dual citizenship, a passport that would get you there. And when they go to France, they'd say, wow, they got a really good system here. Healthcare's basically free. Food's plentiful, and I'm not living in a war-torn country. I'm staying here. Mm-hmm. So France wasn't really like open arms, come on in, everybody, come and. It was more of a this is way better than over there, and we'll come in. So
let's kind of cut to the chase. I mean, I personally believe that there are maybe a lot of Muslims who are happy, good, peaceful individuals who I'm more than happy to love and cohabitate the earth with. I think what you're saying is this large segment of the population and of Islam who are either radicalized or at least empathetic or apathetic towards what the terrorists are doing.
Well, you can't go against it though. Mm-hmm. That's the thing.
So when you say you can't go against it, they're scared. They subconsciously believe it. Like I'm not going to go blow myself up in the name of it, but I'm not going to also not believe what that guy's saying because technically he's following what he's supposed to.
Yeah, well, it's spreading Islam. It's fighting those who are who are the enemies of Islam. It's what Muhammad did. And if you're going to speak out and say, well, no, we shouldn't do that. Well, that's what Muhammad did. So you're going against the prophet. You're then an apostate. The way they treat apostates, when Muhammad treated apostates, is you cut their head off. So apostasy is not a small crime. There are many instances of Muhammad basically saying he apostatized, kill him immediately. Before he gets too far down that road, you take care of him. There's only one instance that I have found where Muhammad didn't kill an apostate or had him killed.
Well, the part that seems the most crazy to me is that my dad, as recently as 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, was stationed in Saudi Arabia for a few months during his time in the military. And every day there were amputations and beheadings in Riyadh, which is the capital, I think.
In the town square.
Yeah, in the town square. So every day in the town square, I mean, this is, in today's time, every day people gather around, and if you
this still happens?
Something.
Oh, it happened, what was it, 2 weeks ago? They beheaded 28 people there was a stampede at Mecca, which has happened now dozens of times, and they captured 28 people and said, you guys are responsible for not keeping, 130,000 people in control. And all these people died and you have to pay for it. Lined all 28 up in the square, went through and just lopped off their heads.
So how come this kind of stuff that you're talking about doesn't you get a lot of sympathy, or anybody who doesn't just, agree lockstep with the idea that Islam is just a complete religion of peace, including our president. Why don't we see more stuff or instances like this coming from across the
because
world?
It costs $58 to create 1 barrel of crude oil in the United States. In Saudi Arabia, it costs $4.63.
So what does that have to do with
why would we ever speak ill of them who's filling our coffers with money and with oil and with all of the luxuries that the people who get our elected officials put into power?
Okay, but
so you're saying they just don't rock the boat for
exactly? Why would you? Why would they? I mean, Saudi Arabia. If you want to talk about crimes against humanity, they're the top of the list.
Yeah,
they're terrible, and they're our allies. We've been supporting them and bolstering them for decades now, and they're terrible. And they lop people's heads off in the public square without trial.
And that's purely, in your opinion, you think that's just because of profit and the ability to continue to get our oil pipeline?
To get that, and the people who are making money on that are the ones who pay for our president and everybody else get elected.
Okay.
Which is a totally different topic.
Yeah,
but we could go into that, but you'd be...
So what do people have to fear or not fear with modern day Islam and the spread, in particular in relation to here in the United States? It's a minority population. Trump was in the headlines for saying exactly what, because it's been twisted by, people who don't agree with him.
Okay, well, so here's the thing. I don't like Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I don't support him. I don't think he's a smart person. I think he's a lying politician. He's changed his vote so many times, ridiculous.
Isn't that kind of redundant?
Yeah, it absolutely is. But he's the worst type because he
Okay.
pretends like he's not a liar.
Okay.
But he said basically we shouldn't let Muslim refugees in the country without knowing what their background is first. Okay. New Year's Eve this year in Germany, 100 women were sexually assaulted in a town square in Germany by 1,000 men. The German government would not release who they were, who their suspects were, but they did release who the victims were, which is completely backwards. Usually protect the victim, go after the suspect. Why didn't they release it? Well, it took 2 weeks for them to finally say, well, they're Muslim refugees. These aren't ISIS. These aren't these radicals who are out bombing people. These are people who've grown up in these Muslim-dominated cultures where that's actually okay. It's not.
Why is it okay?
Women are second-class citizens in Islam.
Are they second-class citizens, or are they not even really considered like
Well,
the same? Like
under
a
Muhammad,
human?
they were chattel. They were basically the spoils of war, which if a Muslim watches, they'll say, oh, you're lying. No, it's in his own words. That's what he said.
Yeah.
But now and today, they're basically raised. That's what women are. And in those cultures, not in all cultures, you can go to the Asian Muslim countries, they do respect women. It's different. But in these Arab-dominated ones where you have these issues, that's the problem.
Okay.
So
well,
do you believe? Go ahead.
Well, I guess for me, it seems like it's hard for me to think that if someone that looked like you or me, like white-looking people, were doing these things in Paris or in any little cluster in a Western country, that it would be something that all of the Western world wouldn't totally freak out about.
Yeah, they would.
About a white-looking person with blue eyes like you
Taking a woman
doing
out in
that
the street and
stuff.
stoning her.
So why? I mean, do you think is there some sort of a double standard or reverse racism? I mean, what is going on?
To me, it's the fact that they provide value to our economy. They provide value to what we want. And other than full-out war and going over and conquering them, which costs too much and isn't worth it, it's easier just to kind of let it happen.
I feel like a lot of people too are afraid to say anything that's contrary because they're going to instantly be labeled as a bigot or a hate.
And I've had that. Anytime I publish under a pseudonym. Like I don't. My real name is not given. Like you could go online and try to search for that. I could give you my pseudonym and you'd be like, oh, I found your article. And that's because the first time I did publish in 2006, I got a lot of death threats.
Well, yeah, I mean it's public. I mean it's common knowledge that cartoonists have been killed, or reporters have been killed, or journalists have been killed for much less.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can. So do you feel like in the way that in America, at least related to how things are with us right now, that I mean, this is kind of an obvious question because we're already seeing it happen, like in San Bernardino. But is that threat growing? Is it getting worse by having these refugees coming in?
And that's that. Here's the number one problem is you can't tell. The foundation's there. Every Muslim is taught the foundation of what the Prophet Muhammad did, how they spread, what the principles are. The foundation's there. Now, if it's a Muslim in Dearborn, Michigan, and they're making threats, I'm going to be a little bit nervous because they're radical up there. If it's one up in Logan, Utah, I'm not going to be too worried. Yeah, they might do something, but they're not surrounded by that. But they both have the same baseline. They both have the same foundation, that is a possibility.
So what about the counter idea, or the counter concept that, these Muslims are going to come here, they're going to love our culture, they're going to be ingrained or Americanized, and they're going to be the loving, non-radicalized, the good side of Islam. Is that, I mean, because that's the argument that on the other side of the coin that people make, right?
And it's there. I mean, that can happen. But Jihadi John was an English rapper.
Mm-hmm.
And that guy grew up in the Western world. And he was over in ISIS chopping people's heads off with a hunting knife. It's there. The foundation's there. There's a baseline foundation there. And when it comes to the point where, hey, it's time, there's an idea in Islam that Islam is supposed to rule the world. It's supposed to take over the whole world. Every person on this earth is supposed to be Muslim. And Sharia law will rule, and Allah will be glorified. And basically that's when a great resurrection can happen, and the end will come. Right now we're getting that with ISIS. They're telling the kids, hey, it's happening. It's time to join. It's time to fight.
Okay, so ISIS, the leaders of ISIS, obviously there's not like one specific leader. What is their goal? And everyone says, these politicians that speak out against Muslims are really just helping the recruiting process. But then, I think to myself, there's no way I could just go to the Middle East and just be nice to a guy in ISIS. And he's like, oh yeah, you're pretty cool. All right, we can hang out together. I mean, is that a possibility, or what is?
If you join, yeah, if you join ISIS and you become one of them, you'd be best friends. But the problem is with this concept of divide and conquer, they're building a caliphate, is what it's called. There hasn't been one since the Ottoman Empire fell. And a caliphate is basically a theocracy where a caliph, a leader, takes over and Islam rules the nation. And there are no boundaries, there are no borders with the caliphate.
This shows my ignorance. Who leads Islam? Like the Catholics have the Pope,
and
Mormons have the Prophet.
And this is another big issue, is there are several sects of Islam. But the biggest is the Sunnis. Mm-hmm. And there was a break after Muhammad. So there was Muhammad, and then there were 3 caliphates, and then Ali. So Muhammad Ali, he named himself after Muhammad, and then so he was a Sunni. Well, then there's the Shiites, and the Shiites believe in the 4 caliphates, including Ali. The Sunnis believe in Muhammad, then Ali, and the other ones. Now there's a lot of doctrinal differences, which were completely boring, but the basic foundation there's the 2. Well, the Sunnis view the Shiites as apostate. When ISIS goes into these countries, they're not killing Americans, they're not killing Christians, they're killing Shiites, who they view as apostates. And there are videos out there, I don't know if you've seen them, but they're awful, where they line up these men and they're saying the same prayer. So the Shiite who's on his knees is praying to Allah. The Sunni, who's got a gun to the back of his head, is praying to Allah. They're saying the same prayer, and the guy pulls the trigger, and they throw him in the river, and they bring the next one up.
I get that, and that's a whole other, the Sunnis and the Shiites and the modern, balance of power. But I'm talking about modern day Muslim. Like, who, as me as an American Muslim, who do I look up to as a source of authority or a source of doctrine?
Your local imam.
So and they look up a report to who?
They'll have a council. So they have a council, but they all pick and choose. So it's basically like having the Catholic Church, and then you have your priest. But that priest pretty much runs his own section of the Catholic Church. And he can answer to other people, or he can pick and choose what he wants. So Muslims can church shop, just like we do. And Catholics do too. If you've been to a large Catholic place, it'd be like Mormons checking out different wards and saying, I like this bishop better.
I did that in college. I looked for whichever one had the best looking girl.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say whichever had the best repentance policy.
Well, once I got the one I needed, then I was good. I could go to whichever
only
ward.
3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
No, so there's no foundation. There's no real hierarchy. And because there's so many splits, that's where all these fights occur. And so that is a very difficult issue, because you can't really speak out as one Muslim to another Muslim and say, this guy's wrong. If you're both Sunnis, you can't do it. If it's a Sunni and a Shiite, absolutely you can. But they have their own imams, they have their own writings, they have, everything else.
So, I mean, what would you like, or what do you think is going to happen? Because, I mean, like I said, I don't want to be, as my own morality and my own judgmentalism. I want to be as loving and understanding of everybody as possible, but at the same time, there's a part of me that goes, oh, you know, I see this just as a human being observing the world, that I don't see Muslims speaking out in mass or condemning or turning over old crazy Uncle Rick to the authorities. You know, and that's what I see as the big problem and what scares me. And, you know, we've kind of seen the thing that happened in France coming, and it happened on a smaller scale here in California. And I think that's what scares the average non-Muslim white American.
I mean, I guess with me, like with Mike, what he's saying is I'm not scared right now. I mean, living where we live, it's not even a thing. But at the same time, you know, what is the end game if all Muslims believe that eventually everybody has to be Muslim, then how do we coexist? How do we coexist with you know, our Western liberal beliefs and devout Muslims? How is that possible?
I mean, it's possible in the sense that we choose to live here where it's not a Muslim caliphate, and they choose to live here where it's not a Muslim caliphate. So they're not, you know, the top dogs. They're not the top tier. Now, because of taqiyya and the concept of deception, they can lie to you, and it's actually considered honorable to tell you, I do not support ISIS. I do not support the jihadists. I do not support this crazy radicalization, all this stuff. That's honorable for them because we, from their perspective, are their
Then why
rulers.
are there so many people or videos going viral of Muslims who are not denying that, even to their detriment, where it's like, well, if you're obviously a supporter of ISIS, then, you know, but you'll see all these people who are not denying that. If it's
That's what I
considered
mean.
honorable to lie, why do they have a problem?
Well, they're not lying.
But what I'm saying is, if it's going to be considered honorable from the lie, why don't they be like, nah, ISIS, they're a bunch of crazy guys? Why?
Because if they do that, that can be seen as an act of apostasy, and you can be murdered for that. And I did speak to one woman in Illinois, and I said, so just come out and say it. And she said, I can say it, but my family can't. My family lives in Iran, and if they said it, it's most likely they'd die. I said, that's a terrible thing. That's a terrible way to live your life, is to think, man, if I speak out, you know, what's going to happen?
So what's your, because I mean, we're getting kind of long on, but
I mean,
what's your prognosis or your assessment of the situation, and what can be done or what should happen?
I'm not super worried, and the reason is because of the infighting. They're not centralized. If it was like the Catholic Church and you had the Pope and you had the head, you know, imam over everything, and they were all unified, yeah, there'd be something to worry about. That's where you kind of step back and say, hey, we might need to bolster up and be worried, but they're not. The Sunnis and the Shiites will kill each other. The Indonesian Muslims, they're much different than the others. There's no centralized doctrine where they just all kind of, you know, converge. It's the North African ones, the ones that are kind of radicalized, that's where you kind of step back and go, okay, there might be a problem here. So far as global domination, it'll never happen. It just can't.
So you're basically saying that, we're always going to have an issue with people, like we've always had an issue from the beginning of you know, recorded history. There's always been issues between people, and you think that Muslims are going to be no different, where it's just going to be every now and then they're going to blow some people up, every now and then they're going to shoot some people, but there's no way they have an infrastructure that's strong enough that the average American has to really worry that they're ever going to be able to do something to take over.
The best thing we
anything.
could do, from my opinion, is to get out of their affairs. They hate Americans not because we're over there. We're not over there conquering them. We're not over there stealing their land and stealing their oil, but we are bombing them, and we are, you know, promulgating wars between them, and we are creating these. I mean, we created Iraq, which most Americans don't know. We created Iraq, and we took Sunnis and we took Shiites and we took Kurds, and we drew a line around them and said, now you're a country, you're called Iraq. Stupid. Like, that's not how they work. But we tried to westernize them, and we've been meddling in their affairs for so long that it's just the point where it's like, we need to get out of there. We need to stop meddling, because then when a bomb drops on them and it's a United States drone that's doing it, they're upset. They want to do something about it.
So that's weird to me that you say that, because that seems like the exact opposite response of what I thought you were going to say. You know, is that because, I mean, that makes sense to a big degree, but I think there's a big concern that if we just left them to their own devices over there, kind of stayed out of their way, it would possibly give way to a bigger threat.
Well, they were left their own devices for 1,300 years. And the only problem was when they started spreading and the Ottoman Empire formed and we had issues with Europe when we were trying to bail them out. But the fact is we don't know.
So you're saying we pull out of there entirely except for our dealings with the oil. Do you think that it would kind of calm down and the infighting would stay over there most of the time?
Yeah, absolutely. They're fighting each other. Saudi Arabia just killed one of the top imams that Iran loves. Iran is Shiite, and Saudi Arabia is Sunni, and they killed one of their top imams. That's in Mormon terms, that's like the Catholics taking one of the 12 apostles and killing him. You'd have a lot of upset Mormons. You know what I mean? And they did that. Iran's huge. You know, they're upset at Saudi Arabia, and we're trying to kind of step in and be like, oh, hey. And in my opinion, it's like, let them do it. If they want to fight, let them fight. Who are we? We're not the world police. We're not the babysitters. If they're going to fight, let them fight.
I do think that, you know, that's one thing. We are the world police, whether we should be or not, which is obviously a lot of problems that extends to everything outside of Islam.
Here's an interesting tidbit. Who are we fighting in Afghanistan right now? Who's the bad guys? Taliban.
Yeah.
Who was our allies in 1978, 79 fighting the Soviets? Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah, how
do they come from being... I mean, you watch Rambo 3. I just watched Rambo 3 the other day, and it was dedicated to freedom fighters of the Afghanistan people, and I was like, that's the Taliban. This movie's dedicated to the Taliban, who we've just spent billions trying to fight.
And Stallone could have thanked him in this...
Yeah, but I mean, if we can get out of there, let them deal with their stuff, let us deal with ours. They don't have any animosity towards us. They still have the entire nation and continent of Africa to dominate before they can even consider trying to go up in Europe and over here before there'd be an issue. But there's no centralization. There's no way they can.
But I think that, you know, that's what the people's concern is, that fellow, you know, Americans, is that they're going to immigrate here. They're going to set up these communities, and then we're going to have a situation like France.
They kill us because our government has killed their family. And I know people don't want to hear that. That's why. They don't have any issues with the United States government until we arm people who go over there and kill their families, and they say, I mean, what would you do if somebody came in here and started shooting up Mormon churches and they had Russian-issued guns? Who would you go after? Who would you be mad at?
The Russians.
The Russians, obviously. And when the Russians say, "Whoa, it wasn't our soldiers who did it," but you armed them. You know exactly what you're doing. You just flop it. You know, that's what the United States is doing. If we backed out of there and said, "Hey, you guys want to kill each other and try to see who's going to be the Grand Caliphate? Go for it. You do your thing. We'll keep our trade and stuff with you."
But do we have any politicians that are? Because I mean, I'm not way into. Political positions and who says what and who doesn't say things. I pretty much see the mainstream media. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody that's saying let's just get out of everybody's business?
Ron Paul, libertarians or isolationists. I'm an isolationist. I don't think we should have military bases all over the world.
Is there anybody that actually has a chance to get elected that's saying anything?
None of that. But the thing is if you look, and this is a different topic, but if you look at who donates to which candidate, it's always the same. Mm-hmm. There's big money in war, huge money in war. Mm-hmm. To keep these wars propagating, it's worth trillions of dollars to very wealthy people who you'll never hear about. I mean, Barack Obama was a godsend in 2007. I genuinely thought this guy could actually make a difference. And he got in and he carried on George Bush. Mm-hmm. Exactly, and then some. I mean, the stuff that he said, well, I'm going to close down Gitmo, I'm getting us out of Iraq, I'm getting us out of Afghanistan, no more drone strikes, no more of this unconstitutional torture, none of this, none of that. I mean, I could go through the list. He's done every single one of those and then more.
Why?
Because that's who paid him to do it.
So,
That's who
so
got him
you're saying you
elected.
were an Obama supporter and now you're not?
Oh, absolutely. When he was saying what he was saying. But he was saying the things I believe, which is we shouldn't be out fighting wars with people we don't even know why we're fighting. We shouldn't sacrifice American lives. We shouldn't spend trillions of dollars fighting a war overseas when we've got homeless people here. We're not taking care of our vets, you know. So,
Well, Andrew, I mean,
Interesting stuff.
that's good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything you'd like to summarize? I mean, because I feel like I learned a lot, and I mean, I've got such a military family that you know, it's interesting to hear that. But I would have to say that my cousin, if I were to guess, he's told me so many things that are similar to what you're saying that I think he probably agrees with you that we should stay out of Islamic type wars. And I think, you know, for the most part, I think maybe it is a good idea to just not necessarily feel like it's our responsibility to keep the peace everywhere. So, you know, how would you summarize your opinion on Muslims and the world and whatever?
I'd say that Islam is a very powerful religion for control over its people, over its followers. And I would also say that Muslims are people just like us. And as we believe, they're our brothers and sisters. And they don't radicalize, quote unquote, radicalize and go out for nothing. They have to be pushed. And once they're pushed then to a point, that's when they explode, and that's when this all goes down. So if we can calm things down in the sense of not putting ourselves in the middle of these situations, which we don't hear about. There's so many attacks, so many bombings, so many shootings that take place that our mainstream media has no idea is taking place.
I watch Homeland, so I'm
Yeah, so I'm sure you're up to date on it.
My wife says I need to start watching that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's stuff that goes on that we don't know that really upsets these people, and that pushes them to say these people are our enemy. If we were to pull out, back out, say, look, let's all cohabitate, let's be peaceful, I promise you they wouldn't have a problem with that. They're not waking up every morning saying, I gotta push Islam. Just like we don't wake up every morning and say, I'm gonna go knock on doors and convert people. They want to live their lives. They want to be happy. They want to raise families. And I think that the best way that we could possibly make a change is through example.
Well, that's a good note, and I think that shows where your head's at and like how you feel about things generally well thought out instead of everybody thinking like, oh, this guy's just like an anti-Muslim guy.
I really,
much the
and I
opposite,
like
you know?
the religion.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful religion, but there's some aspects of it you get into and you go, oh man, this is smart. But yeah.
Well, thanks for being in here.
Thank
I feel
you, guys.
like I learned something, and
you're
that's
very-
some
very
food for
intelligent,
thought for
great.
sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
No, thank
Appreciate
you.
it, homeboy.
Good seeing you guys.
Hopefully, our audience is wanting to put invest the mental energy in that.
That's the other problem, dude. Is it's getting people to go.
Thanks, man. That was great.
Yeah.